I would like to introduce, first to thank El Magdi for his succinct points and, of course, for reminding us about the issue of mistrust. The panelists we have are Michele Broemmelsiek from Catholic Relief Services. We have Swami Chidanand Saraswati from the Global Interfaith Wash Alliance. We have Dean Pallant from the Salvation Army. And in your folders, you will see that you have a two-pager presentation by each of the panelists that you can refer to. Because of time, we may not have a lot of questions, but I'm going to ask Michele to start the presentation. And if time allows us, we'll ask the public to share questions to this presentation. Welcome, Michele.
Thank you. So I'm going to focus a little bit in my presentation, not necessarily on what you have in your packet, but maybe more of this continuing dialogue that we're having. There's been so many incredible, I think, ideas and reflections that we've had over the last few, it feels like days, but I know it's only been hours. So in my role with Catholic Relief Services, I sit in operations. So I bring more of that operational focus to my thinking. In most days, I am trying to translate for our organization the intersection between our Catholic identity and the way in which we carry out our mission of serving the most poor and vulnerable. And I think that's very real to our conversation together. How do we translate together this idea that we want to work together with faith institutions, we want to work together for a common goal of ending extreme poverty, which is incredibly motivating for all of us in the room. That's why we're here. I think for me, as I sit and listen to these incredible presentations, I always come back to the how and the what. How are we going to do this? What are we going to do? And I drive my other executives in CRS crazy because that's where I always go. As an operations person, I am concerned deeply that we figure out the how and the what. Otherwise, these days together don't really translate, I think, into a clear plan. So if I think that the presentation from Lancet was incredible. It gave us some ways in which we are building an evidence base to have conversations, because we all know when we leave the room, the skeptics are there. The friends may be in the room here, but there are many skeptics about this approach that we're trying to encourage, and I think we need to have the evidence to have that discussion. But what evidence do we need? I think often our evidence is built on project-based information. We need evidence that is bigger, that is broader, that is looking at the question of how do we design programs that are getting at extreme poverty, they have results, but that those programs are also supportive and a good environment for faith organizations. So you need the results, but are you building programs and designs that will also allow faith institutions to flourish? I think that for me, as an organization who works with faith institutions across the world in 101 countries, is our continuing concern that we do not create structures and processes that do not allow faith institutions to flourish. They have to be able to continue to do their work in a way that flourishes, and we need an evidence base of how to do that. Secondly, I think on the what, we need to understand where are the places that faith institutions are exceptionally good at transforming lives. We don't want to be asking faith institutions to do soup to nuts when they're good at soup. We need to know what are those soups that they do well. What are the things that we need to be asking? And of course, it's an incredibly diverse world, but still, I think we need to build the evidence around that question. In terms of the how, I have two quick points. One on the how is we have to not start from scratch, but we have to think about how do we support organizational structures that will be allowing us to get at extreme poverty and allow faith institutions to flourish. I personally had a huge learning curve. I spent most of my career overseas, but came back to the United States looking at health and started working with Catholic Health Association, which is based here in the United States and looks at hospital networks across the US. And started thinking about all my work in HIV in Africa and realizing that many of the hospitals and mission hospitals we were working with in Africa today are experiencing the same challenges that hospitals in the United States that were Catholic experienced 50 years ago. So let's start learning today about how they solved some of their problems, not because those solutions are going to be the solution for all of Africa, but because it might give us some insights into new structures and approaches that might help solve some of that. And then lastly, on how, I think we must think about how we collaborate. What are those most vibrant collaboratives that really lead to good and substantive change? And where is the private sector? Where is the different NGO sectors, not just the faith? How do we have those really vibrant collaboratives that I think will generate a good space for us to get at ending extreme poverty? So thank you.
Thank you, Michele. We'll now ask Swami Saraswati to take over and share his perspectives. Thank you.
Respected, distinguished, and honored partners, leaders, donors, sponsors, my sisters and brothers. 63 years ago, when I was born, there were only 2.3 billion people sharing our planet. During just my short lifetime, the population has nearly tripled. Day by day, our air, water, and our land are becoming more and more polluted and more toxic. The things which are meant to bring us life are now sadly bringing illness and death. The poor are, of course, more severely impacted. We are, perhaps, at the most significant moment humanity has ever witnessed. A great and urgent moral responsibility rests on our shoulders. The world is one, and we are one family. We are all interconnected and interdependent. I remember when I was living in the Himalayas, in the jungle, in my youth, doing my meditation, a great sage said to me in Hindi, "Bolo, Jeevan kaisa hai?" What is life? Said, life is what you make it, whether you make it heaven or whether you make it hell. The choice is yours. I remember that great sage today. Truly, the choice is ours. We have the opportunity to unite together, to join our hands and hearts and bring incredible change. As I mentioned last time, today I want to reiterate, it is not a global water shortage, land shortage, or food shortage that threatens our planet so gravely. To me, it is a global consciousness shortage. Sustainable development is wonderful and crucial. However, it can only really impact our planet if it comes with sustainable living. We are at a crossroads today where we faith leaders, public sectors leaders, policy leaders, political leaders, and the public we inspire need to choose the path of sustainable living and conscious living so that the rest of the planet can live at all. Sustainable and conscious living is a choice for need rather than greed. Mahatma Gandhi said so beautifully, there is always enough for everyone's need, but there is never enough even one man's greed. Sustainable and conscious living means we emphasize filling ourselves rather than filling our shelves. Typically, today, everyone is focused on filling on the shelves. Everyone is focused, just filling the shelf. Then the shelf becomes full, but our inner self is empty. And we can see in the world today, everything is set, but people are upset. It is time for a shift from filling shelves to filling ourselves with the divine teachings, connection, and wisdom, our faith traditions. Separation means suffering. Peace and end to poverty. Peace and an end to poverty will only come when we as humanity are united in peace, not divided in pieces. The world faiths are here today at the World Bank. So here and now, today, let us become a united faiths with the united mission to serve as one without discrimination and without hesitation. Instead of spending our days in solitary prayer, let us build anti-poverty programs. Let there be fewer sermons and more service. We have worshipped the Creator for so long, but let us take care of the creation now. Let our work be our worship. This ideal is already being demonstrated so beautifully by my great sisters and brothers in this room. It is a joy and honor to be amongst you all. Now, through the joining of our hands and our hearts, private sector and faith sector, miracles can happen. Great agendas, such as the SDGs, can be forever realized, and we are together anyway. The public sector is the faith sector, and the faith sector is the public sector. 83% of our world belongs to faith. Our sectors are already one. Now, actively working together, hand in hand, heart in heart, we can truly bring about the miracles, change our world needs. Truly, I would say, at this great crossroads of history, hope is in our hands last, which is right after listening to you all came to me. We are trying to end the extreme poverty. But to me, I think we must invest in our, and involve people in our inner poverty also. The moment inner poverty is handled, taken care of it, rest, you will see, will be very easy. Prosperity will blossom in and out. Thank you.
Thank you, Swami. I'll now ask Dean Pallant to share his perspectives.
Thank you very much for the privilege. I will talk to the paper that is in your notes, and there is also a case study online which has more details of some of the things I will touch upon. Our challenge at this conference is to build robust partnerships to end extreme poverty. From a Salvation Army point of view, we have realized in recent years that we need to strengthen our own capacity. So I do come with a sense of humility. We work in 126 countries, but it's patchy. Some places are strong and delivering quality. Other places we are weak and we need strengthening. I have been working at this for about 8 years, and I also just want to add the perspective I bring is having done a doctorate at King's College in London, that sat between the Department of Education, which is on one bank of the Thames, and the Department of Theology, which is on the other bank of the Thames. And it's a very difficult place to stand with your feet on banks of two rivers. Interestingly, that program does not exist anymore, which just shows how hard it is to fuse theology and the social sciences. And that is, I think, what we are trying to do here, and we must do, is bring those two perspectives together. Because sustainable development needs people to have resilient, authentic relationships in all dimensions of life, plus moral traditions and institutions to sustain those relationships. And that's what the faith sector brings. It's those moral and spiritual relationships. institutions that sustain the relationships, because without those, the people get either instrumentalized or commodified. We heard it yesterday. And we have seen that sometimes when we work with powerful, moneyed institutions, they do hollow us out. We do lose our identity. But what is that identity that we've lost? It's people. It's focusing on people. Now, we've said a lot here, we want to be people-centric. Well, what do we mean by a healthy person? What is a developed person? And when we, I think, excavate some of that, we will find the tensions that are challenging us. From a Christian point of view, and I speak from a Christian point of view, and I hope you hear echoes of my tradition, but I don't presume to speak for other traditions. But I think that many faiths have a very thick, robust theological anthropology, an understanding of what a healthy person is. Could I suggest that perhaps modern Enlightenment thinking has got a fairly thin appreciation of the human person, and something that could be explored a lot more, our anthropology, our understanding of what it means to be human. Because we need resources that help us resist that instrumentalization or that commodification. And that's the work that we've been involved with in the Salvation Army, and that's what some of the case studies show. And you'll see on page 2 of my notes a quote from Paul Gifford, who does an ethnography, if I could get the word out, of contemporary African Christianity, and notes how in Kenya the church has become instrumentalized and weakened significantly because it doesn't understand how to deliver a true development. Professor Andrew Tompkins yesterday said something important. He said theology is not static. And for those of you who despair sometimes at what religious leaders say, I would say remember that theology is not a static, fixed thing. It changes, it adapts. By engaging with it, by having tools that help people think through their faith, they get a richer appreciation, a good theology. Part of the problem in the world today is we have some very, very bad theology going on. We're not going to address that by forcing upon it some secular Western view of what the good is. We need to give people the resources to understand and explore their own theological traditions. And that's what the Salvation Army is trying to do with 3 resources that I highlight. Firstly, faith-based facilitation, a way of working that brings faith in, brings the richness of the social sciences and all the other sciences into the discussion, explores it in a community-facilitated way. Secondly, 2 resources that are much more in development. Firstly, what we're calling a mission accountability framework. Accountability, anti-corruption is central. We need faith-based resources that engage with the accountability agenda. Again, we cannot just impose something on people. They will resist it. It needs to be exploring all the dimensions and using all the resources of faith. And thirdly, a unifying framework for measurement. The Salvation Army worked last year with Bridgespan, which is an American-based group out of Bain Consulting. We invested quite a lot of money in trying to come up with a unifying framework for measurement. I refer to it in the case study. I think we've got a framework that works, but we've got a heck of a lot of work to operationalize it. And if any of you here are interested in working, I'd certainly like a conversation with you around that. My central argument is that sustainable development is impossible without a rich valuing of people and an intentional strengthening of relational capacity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Because of time, I might just want to ask us to have one question to this panel. We've heard about the possibilities of the panel telling us about it is not the why, it is the how and where. And we'll come back to the challenges. Yes, please. Introduce yourself.
Thank you, Agnes. My name is Ida Castra Mutoigo. I work as the director for World Renew in Canada, and I'm also one of the member organizations of the Michael Global Network, which is about 579 churches and Christian organizations that work in 84 countries around the world. I guess one of the questions that I have relates to something that we are trying to promote as we work together as faith-based organizations and also with the public sector, and that is about accountability. And we have seen healthy partnerships happen when there is really healthy accountabilities that are being promoted. And so my question is, how do we ensure that we're not displacing the accountabilities that need to be there, that outside donors, for example, are not interfering into that accountability between local citizens and their government leaders, and that we in North America are holding ourselves accountable for our kinds of consumerism behaviors that actually affect global poverty. So it's really a question about how are we ensuring healthy accountabilities.
I think my answer would be that it's a people-centered accountability, and that the people feel that they see the accountability as helping them to do their work. So it's about self-accountability, not imposed external accountability.
Yeah, I would also share that I think that this whole question of accountability is part of a larger canvas that we really have to think about. And it relates very much, I think, to data. And we talk a lot about how do we design metrics, how do we figure out, how do we count things. And for many years, I think in our projects, people in these projects have thought that they're counting things to report to the donor. And they're sitting there tracking things, but they have no use to them personally for what they're making decisions around. And I don't believe we'll overcome the whole question of joint accountability until we understand what are we accountable for. What are the indicators? What is the end result? What is the transformational change? And how do we hold each other accountable for that and use the data we have to make good decisions, to understand what is going on, and to really move forward in that way together.
Thank you. What do you like to say?
Just two very quick things. One is there's been a huge shift in the development sector to embrace the concept of beneficiary or downwards accountability. And interesting, I was just having a conversation with somebody earlier of how difficult it is to introduce that in large institutions. So the principle of downwards and beneficiary accountability is now, it's embraced by the DEC in the UK, it's embraced in Sphere standards, but we've got to do more to make it work. And I would argue that our primary accountability should be to those we serve, and only then can we be effectively accountable to donors and back donors who are actually giving us the money. I think the only other thing I'd say is Dean and I were talking about this earlier, it's worth going back to even the etymology of that word, accountability. And it really all comes down, for me, accountability, and this is what actually communities get this at the front line, accountability is not an instrument of power. It is not an instrument of judging people. It's actually all about strengthening trust in relationships. It's about transparency, and it's about learning and growth. And I think there's something about redeeming the word and rediscovering what it means, and again, becoming aware of how institutions and hierarchies distort our understanding of accountability.
Thank you. A last one. I think because of time, we would like to bring this panel to an end and just say that the panelists have clearly made a point that it is not whether we partner or not. It is how we are going to partner and where the religious and faith communities make the most impact. They've also raised a number of challenges that we need to look at. And I think one of the challenges that was raised by El-Magdi and the other panelists is the mistrust, the prejudices that we have against one another. How do we overcome that? How do we begin to build the trust banks that we have to build in order to journey together? The second challenge that has come up is that we should not look at faith communities, religious communities in terms of assets, but as forces of life, forces that energize and enable communities to redeem their dignity, to restore their humanity. And so whatever development processes and partnerships we will engage in, we will have to acknowledge that. I think the issue of the public sector that was raised in terms of opportunities, it is time to also think of how do we overcome the the danger of making faith communities allied to governments and therefore losing their identity and credibility within communities that they serve. Finally, so that I don't also take a lot of time, I would like to say that the issue of evidence-based is acknowledged, but there is a plea that we begin to look at frameworks that are broader. Faith communities are like long-lasting rivers that run in dry and rainy seasons. They are not seasonal rivers. And so how do we engage in partnerships that will be long-lasting rivers that run in dry and in rainy seasons? Thank you very much.